guys, Eric Keener here with Fin and Forage. Today we've been asked by Bamboo Reef to do a gear review on a few of their guns. So we did 3 guns this time around, all in about the 75 centimeter range, which is very typical for the Northern California coast. We have pretty bad visibility, and so swinging a larger gun that has much better range isn't always an option. So the 3 guns that we've decided to look at are an Epsealon Striker, a Rob Allen Snapper 700, and a Riffe 75. All right, so one of the things we were reviewing as we were testing these guns is buoyancy. And buoyancy is important because in Northern California, you use your gun a lot of times to mark holes. Let's say you're at the end of your breath, you need to come up, but you saw something that could be potentially holding a nice fish. So most of our guns have float lines coming off the back of them, and we'll just leave our gun down there, come up to the surface, do our breathe up, and then head back down to continue hole hunting. So buoyancy for these guns, if it's too light, the surge might be pushing it off the spot. If it's too heavy, it's hard to track. It doesn't move in the water as well. And then if it's not balanced in the water while you're holding it, it may be coming up or sinking if it's not balanced the right way. Another factor that comes into play in the reviews that we did on these guns is how well they fit the hand. Now, it's very subjective because of all the different hand sizes. I'm 6'4", probably got slightly larger hands. So when you put the butt of the gun in the webbing of your palm and then wrap your finger around the trigger, you always want the trigger to be right in the middle of this portion of your finger so that it actually comes into play big time when you're aiming at a fish. If the trigger's too far into your finger, you could rotate the gun as you pull the trigger and you wouldn't even notice it. If it's too shallow, you may be coming down or pulling up. So you always want to make sure that the trigger fits your hand really well. Another thing we were looking at in these guns are the components and their quality. For instance, this gun has all stainless steel trigger mechanism, line release, everything in here is metal, which is usually a sign of a more quality gun. What kind of rubber do you use in the bands? There's all kinds of rubber out there. It stretches differently, it degrades over time differently, so you want to pay attention to that. Whether or not the muzzle of the gun is open barrel or closed barrel. For a short gun like this, where we're usually firing really close to a fish, if the shaft doesn't clear the barrel, you could actually break your barrel, you could bend the shaft. There's a lot of damage that could come out of it. Another thing to take into account when you're looking at a gun is how many bands it has, the type of rubber it uses, the type of wishbones that the bands have. Metal wishbones, can you imagine under tension if it snapped? That could rip through your hand, it could do a lot of damage. 1 to 2 bands is very typical for this length. I prefer 2 because I can keep one loaded for hole hunting, and if I need to take a longer shot for like a mid-water column fish, I can load the 2nd band. I do that a lot. Moving a little bit further back on the gun are how the wishbones hook into the shaft. These are mini shark fin tabs. They're unobtrusive. They work well. They're my favorite type personally. The Rob Allen will have a notched shaft, which on smaller fish doesn't really come into play structurally, but it's something to consider if you're going to be using a gun on larger fish. The last thing we took a look at is the loading stock. Not all guns include them. Most manufacturers have different widths or where they're placed in regard to the handle. We'll talk a little bit about why I liked this one so much in a minute. But just know that you're going to have to be comfortable loading this thing all the time. So you're going to want to make sure that it works for you. All right, so the first gun I'm going to start with is the most affordable. It's the Epsealon Striker 75, aluminum barrel, all metal mech. And to be honest, I feel bad saying this, just based on how it looks, the candy cane colors, it kind of turned me off a little bit. I thought it was going to be cheap, but come to find out it was my favorite gun to shoot for a number of reasons. So we talked about how it fits your hand, and for me, this trigger was perfect. It's the furthest away from my webbing of all the guns that we shot, and right out of the gate, I hit 3 bullseyes. 2 of them were like literally in the same hole. This thing's laser accurate. The rubber was significantly harder to pull, but that's totally customizable based on your preferences. It had a lot of power. It was the loudest underwater gun, that's for sure. What I actually attribute to helping me be so accurate is how the loading stock has a really deep V in it. Typically you just kind of have to follow your bands down and you can usually see a little bit of the tip of the gun, but this really helped hone my focus to where I was aiming on. And that might have been one of the reasons for, as you'll see, the best grouping and bullseyes. It's a really light gun. It tracks really well underwater. If I'm trying to follow a fish, there's not a lot of water resistance here. It's very light and pretty nimble. And overall, it was my favorite gun to shoot. This is the only gun that we use that actually had a reel on it. And as I mentioned before, most of us use float lines. Reels aren't really for this type of fishing. This comes with one, which is fine. At least you have an extra accessory for the gun, but we didn't use it. It didn't really come into play. So the next gun we tried was the Rob Allen Snapper 700, which is a 70 centimeter barrel length. And a few of the components on this gun are very different from the others. First being the trigger mech is a fiberglass reinforced nylon. The safety is located on the top of the gun, which it's pretty easy to move, but sometimes if you get a little piece of sand or something in there, trying to push with your glove on might get a little hard. The shaft has notches as opposed to shark fin tabs. And personally, see the way they lay over the top of that, it just gets a little bit frustrating for me if you can't get your shooting line out of the way to get the wishbone to lock in here. Totally personal preference for me. The line release is down here instead of on the side of the gun. And the way that the shaft is held into the barrel is by looping the shooting line over the top with the Rob Allen muzzle. This gun has the shortest distance between the trigger and where my webbing goes. So for me, I had to really focus on how I was pulling. Instead of pulling with my finger muscle, it was almost like I was trying to pull with my whole hand, which made aiming a little bit hard. My first two shots with this right out of the gate were way off, and then I kind of figured it out and was really cognizant with how I pulled on the trigger. So someone with a little smaller hands, this could probably be perfect for them. Buoyancy in the water, this thing is exactly where you want it. I mean, all the components are as exactly as they ought to be. The gun sank with the shaft in, floated with it out. The rubber on it comes solid from the factory, and it sounds silly, but I love that the flopper stays like this personally. You'll notice that the Rob Allen doesn't have a loading stock, which is typical for Rob Allen. That means you're putting this piece into your chest pad, which totally preference. I like to have something that's more in line with the shaft as I pull it towards the chest. Accuracy after those first two shots, the grouping was pretty tight. It worked well. This gun right out of the gate, there's a reason why so many people go with Rob Allen, and it's because it's a solid gun. Great entry gun, great mid-level gun. It's got everything you want until you're ready to start upgrading and customizing what you're looking for. And one last thing, this gun does have a dovetail if you wanted to put on a reel for your own hunting preferences. Lastly is the Riffe Euro 75. Everything about this gun looks and feels good. It is just a quality brand, quality build. Even the constrictor knots that are around the shooting bungee are rubber wrapped and sealed. They've thought of everything in here. There's a magnet in the tip up here in the wood that holds the shaft as you're loading it, so you don't have to try to fight it to guesswork into the trigger mech. It actually keeps it in the rail for you. The factory rubbers slide into place once you remove this little metal bracket here. They slide in, put it back. Perfect length, perfect power for the gun. I loved everything about this gun. The safety is over on this side. It's a flip safety, all metal on the trigger mech. The loading stock, you'll notice, has a little notch in it, but after shooting the Epsealon and kind of getting spoiled with that thing that really focused my attention on the target, I would almost opt to customize something that gives me more of that, but that's just for me personally. This was the best tracking gun. This is the best feeling gun. It was perfect in the hand. The handle, it moves well underwater. It's perfectly weighted and balanced. I love everything about this gun. It might even be my next one, we'll see. We want to give a big thank you to Bamboo Reef for giving us access to the shop and the gear to go do reviews and test out. We hope that this has been helpful to you. I know we didn't really get too far in the weeds on things like the Rob Allen being 1.45 millimeter aircraft grade aluminum, but if you're interested in those details, scroll down. There's a link to a new blog that's going to have all the technical aspects of these guns. We're going to continue to do gear reviews. So if you find this type of stuff helpful, please just give us a like and a subscribe, and thank you for coming along.